The BBC is spending an astonishing £42 million of public money chasing licence fee payments from the poor and vulnerable. In a GB News exclusive, I can reveal the massive spend is going on the Beeb's, quote, simple payment plan service to collect the newly increased licence fee, which is now £169.50, having jumped, of course, from £159 last month. Details of the contract have been published in a tender which makes clear how the BBC will target skint households who aren't paying up. It says, the simple payment plan provides a payment scheme for a selected group of customers that is simple, affordable and flexible. To deliver against these key features, the plan has been designed to, quote, target low-income households to help increase revenue income and reduce both first-time prosecutions and repeat offending. It adds, it will also allow customers to spread their payments over the 12-month term of their licence. Whichever firm wins the contract will have responsibility to collect the fee and make sure it's paid by threatening fines and bailiffs. One GB News viewer, an 84-year-old woman, got in touch with us after receiving what she described as frightening letters from the BBC, pressuring her to sign up for the new payment plan. The letter, which I've seen, it reads, your TV licence has been cancelled because you've not paid for it. Now, time is running out. You can make a fresh start by joining the simple payment plan. But if we don't hear from you as soon as possible, we'll pass your details to one of our enforcement teams. If they find evidence you're breaking the law, you risk prosecution and a fine of up to £1,000. Collectors chasing licence fee payments have also repeatedly been accused of bullying the vulnerable, including war veterans and a young mum in a women's refuge. So as a reminder, that's £42 million of licence fee money, your money, being spent to demand society's poorest and vulnerable people pay nearly £170 a year to bolster BBC coffers. And what are we getting for our buck? Not a lot, by the looks of it. Over the weekend, the write-on Metro newspaper bizarrely claims that Doctor Who, whose new star is black and gay, by the way, was never made for straight white men. I guess the BBC's hyper-woke agenda is now an open secret, of course. And then there's Gary Lineker, who is ludicrously paid £1.3 million to talk about football. And when he's not doing that, he plays up to the hard left with deeply offensive comments like this from Saturday.
Constant images of children losing their lives day in, day out. Now, obviously, we all know what, October 7th happened and, the Hamas thing, but the
Hamas thing. Good grief. And isn't the great selling point for the licence fee the fact that there's no ads? Well, apparently listeners of BBC podcasts can kiss that goodbye. The Beeb have plans now to include ads on their programmes when they're streamed via third-party platforms such as Spotify and Apple. 20 media organisations have written to the Culture Secretary to demand it doesn't go ahead, including the production company owned by, guess who? Yep, Gary Lineker. It's not like Lineker to make things difficult for his employer, is it? Well, if the BBC are so desperate for revenue, instead of targeting poor people, how about they start by getting his outrageous wage bill off their books? Let's get the thoughts of my panel now. Tonight, I'm joined by Daily Express columnist Carole Malone, former Labour Minister Bill Rammell, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Good evening to the three of you. Carole, let's start with you. 42 million quid targeting the most needy and vulnerable in society. Have they lost their morals, the BBC?
Yeah, I find it astonishing that, when an elderly person gets that kind of letter, it is terrifying. Other people of different ages might not feel quite so scared, but elderly people get really, really frightened over that stuff. It would worry them 24/7. They'd be terrified they're going to be prosecuted. And at that age, these are, we're talking about vulnerable, sick people. This is shocking. And, you mentioned how much they're spending on 42 million on hunting them down. The BBC gets $4 billion a year from licence fee money. But it spends nearly 100 million of that, both on its outlandish salaries for its backroom staff and celebrities like Gary Lineker, who you pointed out there. And it spent last year nearly 30 million quid in payoffs for people who were leaving the organisation. This is squandering licence payers' money. And you said, what do we get for it? I think we get a lot of great things from the BBC. I do. But I don't think we get enough things to justify 4 billion quid. And I certainly can't stomach their news news coverage anymore. And if I was Jewish in this country currently, I wouldn't be able to watch the BBC.
Well, there we go. Of course, I mean, they've got a litany now of errors to do with the Israel-Gaza war, not least in December when they said Israel bombed that hospital in Gaza. Nick Robinson, their Radio 4 star, on Twitter saying that Israel was murdering Palestinians. Bill Rammel, your thoughts on the Beeb?
Well, and yet, and the polling evidence backs this up, the vast majority of people, particularly in a time of crisis, still trust the BBC for its news coverage more than any other broadcast organisation. And let's get the costs into context.
What makes you say that?
The polling evidence.
What polling evidence? Because I haven't heard that. Because every year, 1.5 to 1.7 million people hand in their licences. They don't want them anymore. So what is this polling evidence?
Look at the detailed polling evidence, and it shows that people gravitate towards the BBC because they trust it. Put the costs in context as well. The licence fee is about £3 a week. It has to be taken on board because otherwise the BBC can't function. Compare that to other organisations like Sky that I pay 8 times that amount to. I do that willingly.
You can't compare them. It's commercial. The BBC is the state broadcaster. It is funded by the state. The two aren't comparable. The BBC could do and say what it wanted from me if it funded itself, but it does not.
Yeah, Bill, the difference is you're not going to be threatened with jail if you don't pay your Sky. They'll just cut you off. Suzanne Evans,
but you have to pay your taxes as well, and we chase people for paying their taxes.
£3 a month is great, Bill, if you actually want it. £3 a week if you want it. Now, I used to work for the BBC. I used to be very proud to work for the BBC. Carole, you mentioned you can't listen to the news now. The one thing I absolutely loved was on the odd occasion when I worked for the Today programme on Radio 4. So proud of that programme. I can't listen to it now. I'm screaming at it within 10 seconds if I turn it on. It's not good for my mental health because it's so unbelievably
I think, Suzanne, you may have shifted rather than the BBC.
No, I don't know.
Your head's down a manhole.
I was, committed to objective, responsible, equal broadcasting. It's not like that again.
Not like that.
Okay, Bill, let me just show you a clip from David Cameron, Lord Cameron, speaking to the BBC. We'll get that in just a second. But we're talking about the trust of the BBC brand. They, as I said, they have a litany most recently, infamously, of their absolutely torrid coverage of the Israel-Gaza war. So they can't even call Hamas a terrorist organisation. They can't bring it upon themselves, despite the atrocities of October the 7th.
They do now call it a terrorist organisation. Look,
occasionally
the BBC make misjudgments, as do all news broadcasters.
Let's play this clip.
You see what Hamas are prepared to do, you just realise the terrible, dreadful, inhuman people, frankly, that we are dealing with. And maybe it's a moment, actually, for the BBC to ask itself again, should we describe these people as terrorists? They are terrorists. If you kidnap grandmothers, you kidnap babies, you rape people, you shoot children in front of their parents, what more do they need to do for the BBC to say, look, these are terrorists? They really are.
Bill Rammel, you're saying that they've changed that now. That's not true, because I was listening to a news bulletin this morning and they still said, according to the UK government, Hamas is a terrorist organisation. Why can they not bring it upon themselves to call that death cult terrorist?
I have seen BBC journalists referring to Hamas as terrorists, and of course they should be referred to as terrorists. But compare and contrast the BBC with its news editorial standards, its reliance on independence, compared to other news broadcasters.
Listen,
and ahead.
You have to be joking. You've got a very short memory. Brexit for what? No, let me say, because you're saying that this Brexit for one. The coverage of Boris and Partygate for another. Totally ignored what Keir Starmer, not justified at all.
And the coverage of Israel. Where's the wall-to-wall coverage of Angela Rayner? And that's not happening on the BBC.
Exactly. Nick Robinson with Angela Rayner, who was supposed to be drilling her down on the two houses business, wished her happy birthday that day. Instead, he had no intention of giving her a hard time. They do not give Labour politicians a hard time. It's clear.
Every day of the week they are challenging and scrutinising Labour politicians.
Tories.
And look, I'm a lover of GBNews, right? I appear here quite often, but I think most objective people, when they're contrasted with the BBC's news coverage and GBNews's and asked which is the most reliable and independent, they choose the BBC.
I've just given you tons of examples about how they don't even do what they are professing to be good at, which is accuracy. When it comes to bias, they had 3 people on a Newsnight panel last year discussing whether this TV station should be shut down, all of them sat there saying, yes, they had to apologise for that. That's one small example how they're not doing their job properly.
The point is, if you want to watch the BBC, that's fine, pay for it. What I object to is having to pay not to watch the BBC, but to pay the BBC so you can watch everything else. And that's the problem. And that's why I, having previously been a passionate defender of the licence fee, because I think the BBC did, you know, and we just had 4 TV channels, gave a great output. But now we've got so much other choice. If the BBC is that good, it should be able to stand on its own 2 feet in the commercial
And just finally, Bill,
hold on. Around the world, the BBC is respected. And the reason we fund it via a licence fee rather than taxation is that it has independence from government and civil servants. And I think that's the way it should be.
It's not independent to support one political party.
It doesn't support one political party. It
Bill,
bashes all the parties.
You would say that because you're left-wing and you probably like the coverage again. But a lot of other people do
rail
not
against
like
some of the coverage on the BBC.
I listen to it now, and the bias is obvious. It's clear.
It is.
Bill, last word.
Yeah, it's independent. It's independent from government, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah, OK, all right, feisty start. Now, look, a TV licensing spokesman said our simple payment plan is designed for people in financial difficulty. It is the most affordable way to pay for a TV licence as it allows eligible customers to spread the cost of a licence fee evenly. This 6-year contract ensures we are able to continue offering the simple payment plan when the current contract ends. £42 million of your money, by the way.